Dr. McGill, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Miners. Can we be Andrew and Stu?
Yeah, call me Andy, actually.
Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. I know a lot about your background. Being a chiropractor, I've heard you lecture many times. I would say that the research you have done over the years guides me more than any other research I've read when it comes to rehabilitating spines and making recommendations around spine. So it's a pleasure to have a one-on-one conversation with you finally. But rucking, so before we get into that, why don't you give me a little bit of background about yourself? What makes you passionate about low back pain?
Well, I was a professor of spine biomechanics for 32 years at the University of Waterloo, and I retired 7 or 8 years ago now, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I unified all of our investigations around low back pain and performance enhancement. But now I'm here at BackFit Pro, and I see patients just 2 days a week. And the other
Nice.
5 days, I tell my wife my job is to make sure everyone around me lives their best life. So that's it in a nutshell.
Very cool. So you've kind of done the full spectrum then. You've come from being a researcher and a scientist to now applying it at patient level as a clinician kind of.
Yeah.
We're talking about rucking. And so for our listeners, rucking is basically wearing a backpack, and it sort of stems from the term from military. So what's your understanding when you say rucking? What is rucking?
Those who have military experience and have been through boot camp think of rucking quite differently. In boot camp, rucking is used as a tool that is much more than just an exercise. So rucking to them is they put a load on their back. They might start out at the typical military clip would be about a mile every 15 minutes, which doesn't sound extraordinary, but then they will go into a shuffle and then eventually into a run where both feet are actually off the ground at the same time, which is a very, very different thing than I think what we're talking about. Rucking in the military context is really about mental toughness to really push the recruits, let them become painful, and teach them that they're not going to die. And the other thing is the group dynamic of it as well. You never leave a comrade behind. Everybody must cross the finish line. So it's a group dynamic exercise to get everybody across after, a 30-mile ruck, so to speak. So these are all very different things. So what I think we're talking about then is people putting load on their back through a pack and going for a walk or a hike.
That's my understanding too. Like it's a trend in society, it sounds like, where people are saying, hey, go rucking as another form of getting both strength or resistance loading and cardiovascular training by going out, walking or hiking with a backpack. So it's probably different from what the military definition that you've just described.
Right. Well, with every answer I give, I try and start with a scientific, evidence-based foundation and then a little bit of an application. So may I riff a little bit on the science?
Please.
Let's go back in history 2,100 years ago to the times of General Julius Caesar. The Romans would camp about 30 miles away from their adversaries. The adversaries would send out their scouts who would then report back to their generals, the Romans are 30 miles away. We can rest easy through the night and we'll escape in the morning. What Caesar did was march his recruits under load 30 miles through the night and have a very successful surprise attack. It was so interesting, the mechanics that were written in the scrolls, walking heel to toe, upright posture, ears over the shoulders, swinging the arms about the shoulders, not the elbows. So what we know today was they were optimizing the storage and recovery of elastic energy. So as the left leg goes forward and the right arm goes forward, they've created an elastic across the back that crisscrosses. You store elastic energy and you recover it, all in the name of efficiency.
Interesting.
What all that means is they were treating the soldiers as elastic athletes, not strength athletes. So the more load that is carried in a backpack, you're transforming the elastic athlete into a strength endurance athlete. But when you look at rowers, runners, they are more elastic kinds of athletes. So now we're starting to get down to the subtle nuances of how much load for how long, etc., because people unknowingly get the variables not right, and they might detune the athleticism which is their goal. So there's the first little thought. When
Okay.
I was at the university, we did quite a number of studies on load carriage. I think back to almost 40 years ago, where my PhD supervisor actually was measuring load carriage high or low for the Canadian military.
And load carriage meaning carrying on the back, like a backpack carrying a load higher or lower on your back. Yeah.
Correct. But if you want efficiency with a battle level, field ready amount of load, it's maybe better to carry the load higher in the pack.
Hmm.
The thrust line goes down through the hips and that kind of thing. But if you walk over undulating rough ground, it's a tremendous increase in low back and hip stress. So it's much better to carry the load lower, which is interesting. We looked at subcategories of back pain because,
Hmm.
I get asked, oh, is rucking good for back pain? And the answer is it good for leg pain? Is it good for head pain? There's no such thing as non-specific pain. It's all very specific. So when we get into subcategories of pain, my answer would change very much.
So for a layperson who's thinking, read this in the New York Times or read it in the Toronto Star and say, hey, I'd like to try rucking. How important is it for them to be cautious about potentially doing this based on some of the research of carrying, the backpack higher or the backpack lower? So having loose straps versus tight straps, the waist straps, all of these things, the chest strap or the sternal strap, do all those things matter? And is there a point that a person should be worried about it if they were going to try rucking to prevent injury or to not hurt themselves?
Okay, so if they don't have a back pain history, I'm not worried about it. The progression, the dosage, the load, the location in the pack all matter. And it's our job to optimize those. Many people will go on their first time out with 20 pounds in their pack and they'll go for 5 miles. They get sore and they don't do it again.
Yeah, they're breaching their tolerance. They're overloading, right?
Right. I could take someone with an open fissure disc bulge. So there's someone who's got a very specific mechanism to their back pain. If they went for a walk without a backpack, that might cause them back pain. But when you look at the mechanics of that, and I know some people are on audio and some people are on video, so I'll try and explain this. When you stand up and you lean forward, the back muscles, the erector spinae, must contract to counterbalance the forward lean of your body. Can you imagine if you put a backpack on with weight that also is jacking up the back, but it's got a more favorable moment arm? And I've explained this in orthopedic seminars, and some of the surgeons don't even get it, but we've measured it. In other words, the load in the backpack pulls the spine to an upright posture. It actually shuts down and reduces the load on the spine. So do you see the nuances of all of this? But going back to your question, the average middle-aged person, and they want a ruck, more power to them.
So it doesn't matter as much if they're having a backpack that is higher or lower, or they don't need to go out and buy a special backpack, or should they still be mindful of where they're putting the load on their back?
If you want to optimize training capacity, the more you optimize and are knowledgeable of the variables, the more capacity you will have. That's why people hire good coaches to determine those variables, optimize them, and enhance resilience and performance. So it does matter. And I'll throw in a little bit more than that. Have you read the book, The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter?
I've heard a quote or two from him. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Michael's been an old friend for a lot of years. It's a fabulous book and fabulous philosophy. Michael's thesis in that book really is people would be healthier, both mentally and physically, if they realized always seeking comfort is not the best way to have the most robust, fun life. And you can take two people, one is movement adverse, there's no way they're going to ruck, and the other person, type A, give me the backpack, they're going to overload it and go too much. So it's a trick to find that middle of the ground. But, look at the person, and I know you must have patients like this. They come in, psychologically, they're depressed. Their pain is overwhelming for them. If they could just get out in the sunshine, breathe some air, think of what's around them, get that feeling of being lucky to be alive, that is much more than just the movement.
So that's also benefit of rucking, the ability to get outside and exercise. So there's many benefits to rucking then. Cardiovascular fitness, cardiopulmonary fitness, some level of strength and loading, resistance sort of components to it, as well as getting outside, enjoying nature, and having the mental bump of being outside on a nice day is another benefit to doing something like rucking as an alternative to going to a gym, as an example.
Right.
There's all kinds of variables before you prescribe. So there isn't really an ideal amount of weight that someone should ruck with then, right?
Well, people have tried that historically. Over 20 years ago, there was a guideline, I believe it was from Italy, that school children should be able to carry 20% of their body weight in their school backpack.
That was a guideline put forward by like the school board or by the country?
No, I think it was the health branch of the government.
Interesting.
And don't quote me on the 20%. It might have been 30, it might have been 15, but whatever the load was, we got a group of kids at the university. We measured the load at 20% of an 80-pound kid just about buries them. And then the issues, well, a lot of them would carry it over one arm and then over the other. And anyway, to make a long story short, I think they went to 10%. And people were crying, oh, they should never carry it on one shoulder. And I said, well, wait a second. If you carry it over one shoulder for 10 minutes and then 10 minutes on the other shoulder, we just call that good training. What we did was we created these frames that were adjustable. So it wasn't only a matter of the weight, it was a matter of the distance. Sometimes people will get more benefit with a labile liquid load that shifts. Now you need more core stability to control it. So if your goal is core stability, have a liquid bag. Other people know that is far too much, and their goal isn't stability. It might be something else. And if you want someone who's be good at everything, fit, resilient, pain-free, pick a reasonable load for them. Too much load will decrease the elastic component of their athleticism.
So too much is no good. Too little is no good.
Yeah, more is not better. Tune it, and you might vary the distance a little bit. You might vary the time off. But some people find that they get sore when they ruck 2 days in a row. Yes, allow 1 day to adapt.
You need recovery.
Yeah. When I was young, your age, I was interested in strength. I didn't need mobility. Nature just gave it to me. And I enjoyed all of that. But now, 2 days a week, I do something for strength and power. 2 days a week, I do something for mobility. You know, I've accumulated a few miles and a few injuries. I have to make sure I maintain appropriate mobility. And 2 days a week, I really focus on cardiovascular. And 1 day a week is rest. The other rule I follow is I never do the same thing for 2 days in a row. So I don't do strength 2 days in a row. Now, if I follow that, I feel fabulous. You know, that's why there are experts in exercise
So
prescription.
periodization, basically.
Yeah, exactly that. But my periodization now as someone in their late 60s is very different than the periodization when I was 16 and 30.
For sure. Absolutely. And it should be, because your body's not the same. You hear in popular culture and popular media about don't wear a backpack, your backpack's too heavy. Or you hear people talk about you shouldn't carry your suitcase in one arm, and you shouldn't have a suitcase. You should have a backpack, because a backpack's better. Or you shouldn't have a backpack, you should have a rolly thing to make sure you're not putting that weight on your body. Is there truth to those things when people say, oh, have both straps of your backpack on, or is that just mythology?
I've been on various panels, and someone will express the concern that you just did. And then I ask them, did you drive your kids to school today? And they think that comes out of left field. And they'll say, yeah. And I said, so you are taking away the challenge of their life and decreasing their fitness, decreasing their bone density so that they have a tougher life when they get through to being an adult. And these are the same people who are worried about too much. Let the kids walk to school. Let them carry their backpack. I wouldn't like to see someone pulling a trolley with their books in it.
Yeah, I agree with you. But those are the attitudes that we see in society or in pop culture sometimes.
Right. Well, I had to work against that in the university. I remember I was on the health and safety committee for a while, and someone riding their bike had struck a student pedestrian. And this rally around the campus, we must ban bicycles off
Really?
the
Are
campus.
you
And I
kidding?
thought,
Wow.
I have to fight this. We want bicycles on the campus. We want people walking and ambulating. And so, anyway, this is the attitude, I suppose, that is causing decrements of health at all levels.
Without getting too deep into the medical side of things or into the imaging side of things, is there people that might be suffering a certain type of back pain where wearing or a backpack or using a backpack or using rucking as an exercise modality might be beneficial? You mentioned for someone that had a posterior disc herniation with a fissure, that putting that back pain might create some extensor load, which might be beneficial to vacuum the disc, if I understood you correctly. Is there another example where someone might be able to say, I should try rucking because it might be helpful?
We don't work at the level of might. That's guesswork. We do a very thorough assessment to understand the pathway of their pain mechanism.
So to take what you're saying is then, if someone is listening to this podcast and hears, that in some situations using something like rucking would be beneficial for someone, they shouldn't be trying it on their own. They should be getting guidance first, is what you're saying.
An assessment would certainly help. But here's the thing. If a person wants to try it on their own, I mean, I wrote the book Back Mechanic for the lay public for a reason. It guides the person through a self-assessment to at least determine whether their pain is posture-driven, load-driven, etc., or specific activities. But let's say they've gone through that, they have a rough idea of what their pain triggers are, and they want to ride a bike or they want to ruck. Do a very short exposure. Not something that will blow them back up into a full-blown acute episode again, but just a brief little exposure. In other words, dip your toe in the water and ruck for 5 minutes with 10 pounds. The next day, audit. Are you slightly better? Are you slightly tweaked? If you're slightly better, don't do anything the second day. That was the day to get into that adaptation. Third day, do the ruck again, add 10% to either the distance or the load, just one. And now you're honing in on, am I better off with a bit more load? Am I better off with a bit more distance? Fourth day, off, audit and adapt. Fifth day, another 10%. So this is the science of converging on the optimal dose without crossing the tipping point. Eventually, you might touch the tipping point. But if you're only adding 10% every other day, you will tickle it, and then you'll have your answer.
So it's mindfully titrating loads, basically.
Bingo. What a nice way to put it.
When we talk about rucking, and again, people will try to sell you anything. Is there a specific backpack that they should be looking for? Is there a quality in a backpack that they should be looking for?
Well, my answer is yes, but my method of finding what's best for them would be to go to a good quality shop that sells backpacks and try a few. The scientific approach there is what we call bracketing. Let's say, we were talking about footwear or something like that. And I'll just regress a tiny bit because we get this question a lot. I'm on the lifting platform. I see some people wear ballet slippers, and I see some people wear Olympic lifting shoes, which are very stiff, heel elevated shoes, as you know. And I'll say, well, I don't know, because some people are more resilient and feel more comfortable and perform better in ballet shoes and others. So what do? Try lifting one day in ballet slippers, and then the next day, go to the polar opposite, a Olympic rigid-soled elevated heel shoe. Now, that's called bracketing. You should be able to tell which one is suitable for you. Okay, say it was the ballet slipper. Now let's go to more of like a Converse basketball shoe. Now you've bracketed it. You've gone halfway. In other words, you're converging all the time on what is optimal for you.
Right.
And that's exactly how I would answer the question with the backpack, because we see it in the military. That is the bracketing process that the soldiers use. And everyone is different.
Hmm. So it's almost trial and error is what you're saying.
It is.
The last question was, is rucking suitable for individual L ranges? And I think we kind of talked about that too, that create discomfort, right? Build capacity by exposing yourself to things that are not cushy and soft and sweet all the time. So the answer would probably be, and maybe I'll ask you anyway, Stu, just to see what you think is rucking suitable for all ages?
There's a preposition, I suppose, that the people who are most successful are those who are willing to have the highest level of being uncomfortable. Or you can quote Arnold Schwarzenegger, stay a little hungry. Don't get too comfortable. And it keeps you striving. So do you see, it's, some people like to have conversations. Oh, McGill, you're a pure biomechanist. Don't you take into account psychosocial aspects? And they don't know our work. We don't see a dichotomy between mental health and physical health. It's all one. And this idea of you must go to levels of discomfort, there must be a yin and a yang. It's no fun being comfortable and doing what you want to do free every day. It loses its meaning, its context. So having a good ruck or something else and going for a sauna, which again is a little uncomfortable, maybe a contrast shower with icy water. It's joie de vivre. It's living life.
Creating a good life comes to challenging yourself and not always taking the easy path, right? There's benefits in doing things that are harder because your body will adapt to those things. Just like when you're talking about with an injury, you have to find out what that level is, what that capacity is. And then you have to find where it is and challenge it to allow adaptation so that that tissue gets healthier and more strong over time. And so whether you're an 85-year-old woman that wants to try to build some level of improved fitness, that's still doable, but the capacity is different than a 23-year-old male. And so it's going to be different for everybody, but the point is to get out and do something. But do it in a logical way, do it in a safe way, start small, build gradual. So is there anything, Stu, that if, in general about rucking that you would like to say that would be helpful for our listeners?
Know your goal. Sometimes the goal is unrealistic and unsustainable, and maybe even counterproductive to their sustainable athleticism. So know your goal and then choose the best path to reach it in terms of the right exercise, whether they want to get to the goal faster and be efficient, recognizing their injury history. So many men, particularly, will come here as back pained patients, and I'll say to them, what are your goals? And they'll say, well, I want to set my next personal best in the deadlift. And I said, really? Well, you do realize that's why you're here as a back pain patient. It's not that I'm against deadlifting. It's just they didn't understand how much science is required to get someone to lift a personal best. And they didn't realize their technique was so terrible. They weren't even close to their personal best, but that's another issue. But then I say to them, you do realize that if you go to your orthopedic surgeon who replaces hips and does spine surgery, go see who's in his office. And they will be, guys who ride Harley Davidsons with the heavy vibration. They will be the ones who deadlifted far too much for far too long. And I'll then say, how about this for a goal? Do you have children? And they'll say, yeah. I said, do you have grandchildren? And I said, well, I hope to. Good. I said, would you like to play with your kids on the floor when you're in your 70s? Would you like to be able to pick them up? Because you're on the path of a higher, stronger athleticism now, but you won't have it when you're in your 70s. Oh, they said, you know what? I like that goal. Good. Now let's create sufficient strength, sufficient mobility, Sufficient cardiovascular fitness. Sufficient, not too much. Sufficient will be more sustainable over the lifespan. And so having that discussion about what is the real goal really locks us onto a lifelong path here for optimal health. And as I said earlier in the podcast, living your best life.
I think that's great because it links to lifespan, but the concept we talked about, health span, right, is a term that's being used now, not just living longer, but having good functional capacity for the duration of your life. So Dr. McGill, I know you've written several books and a lot of resources that you've created for people. So if someone out there is suffering from back pain or wants to learn about their back in general or how to recover from back pain, what would you recommend?
Well, I've written several books, as you know, for people like you, for my clinical colleagues, but they're not consumable by the lay public. So I wrote the book called Back Mechanic for the lay public who have struggles with continuing back pain. The book guides them through a self-assessment so they understand their specific back pain pathway, and then it shows them what to do and not to do. And we also have clinicians who've studied with us and are very familiar with the very stepwise methodical approach to addressing their back pain. And that's on our website, backfitpro.com. So hopefully that will give guidance to those who are finding a pain-free, resilient back a bit of a challenge.
Great. And that should be the goal for everyone, to get a pain-free, resilient back.
It makes life a little bit more fun.
It sure does, doesn't it? Okay, thank you so much for your time, Dr. McGill. I know what a busy guy you are, and even though you're retired, you're still busy doing lots of things and still helping people on a regular basis at your clinic, backfitpro.com. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much for all you do and helping guide the public to a better life.
This podcast episode is intended to provide general information about health and wellness only and is not designed or intended to constitute or be used as a substitute for medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. You should always talk to your Medcan healthcare provider for individual medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment, including your specific health and wellness needs. This podcast is based on the information available at the time of preparation and is only accurate and current as of that date. Source information and recommendations are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. Medcan is not responsible for future changes or updates to the information and recommendations and assumes no obligation to update based on future developments. Reference to or mention of specific treatments or therapies does not constitute or imply a recommendation for endorsement. The links provided within the associated document are to assist the reader with any specific information highlighted. Any third-party links are not endorsed by Medcan.